The howl cut through the night like a scream in the dark, sharp, desperate, and terrifying. Eliza's heart raced as she gripped the cold wood of her grandfather's slingshot, her fingers trembling. She had heard stories of wolves in these mountains, of packs that hunted under the full moon, but she never thought they would come for her family. The air around them was thick with fear, her parents' eyes wide with panic as they tried to barricade the cabin door, their voices strained with urgency. "Get inside, Eliza," her father shouted, but she couldn't move. Outside, the wolves were closing in. Shadows flickered, shifting between the trees, their glowing eyes locked on her every move. She could feel their hunger, their ferocity, but she also felt something else, something fierce. It was the same feeling she had when her mother taught her to fight with her slingshot all those years ago, the same determination that had carried her through every challenge in her young life. She couldn't run. She wouldn't. The lives of the people she loved most in the world depended on her now. In the dead silence that followed, Eliza raised the slingshot, took aim, and let the stone fly. The sun was beginning to set behind the distant peaks of the mountain range, casting a golden glow over the quiet, remote village where Eliza lived with her parents. The evening air was crisp, scented with pine and fresh earth, and the sky above turned a deep shade of lavender as twilight descended. They had moved here a few years ago, seeking peace after the chaos of city life, the constant noise, the crowded streets, the endless rush of people and cars. Here, in the woods, they hoped to find something simpler, something that would allow them to breathe again. And for a while it had worked. The tranquil rhythm of the seasons, the stillness of the surrounding forest, and the freedom to roam without ever hearing the roar of a passing car or the hum of artificial lights at night. This had become their sanctuary. Eliza loved it here. She loved the quiet of the forest, the way the trees whispered secrets with every gust of wind, the way the light played on the surface of the stream as it wound its way through the valley. She spent most of her afternoons exploring the woods, watching deer graze near the water's edge, or picking wildflowers in the meadows. It was a perfect escape. But tonight was different. As she sat with her parents by the fire outside their cozy log cabin, Eliza felt something stir inside her, a quiet unease that she couldn't explain. The flames crackled and popped, sending small embers drifting up toward the stars. But there was no other sound. No crickets, no rustling of leaves in the wind. The forest was unnervingly silent, as if it too was holding its breath. Her father, sitting opposite her, glanced up from tending to the fire and noticed her distracted gaze. His brow furrowed slightly, a line of concern appearing on his face. "Everything all right, Eliza?" he asked, his voice warm but tinged with an unfamiliar edge. "Just a little tired," she replied with a smile, but even to her own ears, her voice sounded weak, forced. She turned her gaze back to the darkening woods, the silhouettes of trees stretching up like black fingers against the dying light. A coldness crawled up her spine. Something wasn't right. The feeling gnawed at her, but she couldn't place it. Maybe it was just the loneliness of the night, the way the forest had fallen silent. Or maybe it was something more. She couldn't shake the sense of being watched. Her mother, who was seated next to her, smiled softly, her eyes still focused on the fire. "Don't worry, dear," she said, trying to reassure Eliza. "It's just the stillness of the evening. Sometimes it's like this." But Eliza wasn't convinced. The stillness felt wrong, unnatural. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and she shifted uncomfortably on the wooden bench, her thoughts scattered. And then, just as Eliza was about to push the uneasy feeling from her mind, it happened. A distant, sharp howl echoed through the trees. It was haunting and mournful, slicing through the silence like a knife. Eliza froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She had heard wolves in the distance before, during her walks in the forest at night when the moon was full, but this howl was different. It wasn't a random cry. This was deliberate. And it was close. Before she could process what she was hearing, another howl rang out. Louder. Closer. The sound of it made her blood run cold. Her father's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. He set the poker down by the fire, his hands trembling just slightly. "Wolves?" he muttered under his breath. His tone was calm, but there was an edge of tension in his voice that Eliza had never heard before. "Stay close," he ordered, though it wasn't clear who he was speaking to. The command was just as much for himself as for them. Eliza's mother stood up immediately, her eyes wide with concern. "It's getting closer," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. She reached out to Eliza, grabbing her arm gently but firmly as though pulling her into safety. Eliza didn't move. Her body was frozen in place, her eyes wide, still searching the shadows of the forest. Her heart was pounding, every instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. Something wasn't just getting closer. It was already here. "Go inside," her father said, his voice now sharp, the weight of urgency in his words unmistakable. "Quickly." Eliza's feet seemed to be stuck in the earth as the panic began to creep in. Her mother, sensing her hesitation, grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the cabin. But Eliza's gaze remained fixed on the forest, her mind racing. It was a feeling she couldn't explain. But there was something in the air, something that told her this wasn't just a random pack of wolves. This was a hunt. Her father's voice cracked as he called after them, "Run, Eliza. Don't look back. Now." She couldn't tear her eyes away from the woods. That was when she saw them. At first, they were just shadows, flickers of movement between the trees, barely perceptible. But then she saw them clearly. Dozens of them. Glowing eyes, hundreds of them, like embers burning through the dark. The pack of wolves had surrounded the cabin, their eyes gleaming in the firelight as they circled, drawn to the warmth, the scent, the sounds of her family. The moonlight glinted off their fur, but they remained hidden just beyond the firelight, as though waiting for something. Eliza's breath hitched and a chill ran through her body. This wasn't just a random pack of wolves. They were waiting. They were hunting. A growl, low and dangerous, sounded from the edge of the trees, and suddenly, everything was loud. The crackling fire. The rapid thudding of her own heart. The rustling of paws on leaves. Eliza felt like the world had shifted beneath her, like her reality was suddenly something she couldn't control. Her father's voice broke through the panic. "Run!" he shouted again, this time with an edge of raw terror in his voice. Her mother pulled harder, trying to drag Eliza toward the door, but Eliza couldn't move. Her body felt paralyzed by fear, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The wolves were closing in. They weren't just circling anymore. They were moving toward them, slowly but with purpose. Their growls grew louder, more menacing. The cabin was their only refuge. The door. Safety. But her feet felt like they were glued to the ground. There was no way out. And as Eliza looked back one last time, she saw them, eyes, glowing brighter now, reflecting the firelight as they moved in a slow, deliberate pattern. "Get inside, Eliza." Her father's voice broke her trance, but it was too late. The wolves were already too close. She could hear their breathing now, hot and heavy, as they stepped out of the shadows into the flickering light. And then, with a final, terrifying howl, the wolves charged. Panic surged through Eliza as her parents sprinted toward the cabin, urgently shouting at her to move faster. But Eliza's legs felt like lead, her body frozen in terror. The howls, sharp, wild, grew louder still, echoing through the trees and sinking into her very bones. She could hear the rustling of paws against the underbrush, quick and relentless, growing nearer with every heartbeat. Her breath was ragged as she turned back, her eyes scanning the dark forest. In the briefest flash of moonlight, she saw them, the first wolf, breaking from the trees like a shadow. Its eyes glowed with an eerie hunger, and its bared teeth gleamed white in the darkness. The beast's muscles rippled beneath its fur as it crouched low, ready to pounce. Eliza's chest tightened, and the world seemed to shrink around her. "Come on," her father shouted from the cabin's door, his voice ragged with fear. Her body moved on instinct as she stumbled toward him. Her heart thundered in her chest, too loud, too fast. She was almost at the door when she heard the unmistakable sound of a wolf's growl, deep and guttural, just behind her. Before she could even turn to face the beast, her father slammed the door behind her, the lock clicking with finality. His face was pale with fear, his eyes wide and frantic. "Are we safe?" her mother whispered, her voice trembling as she clutched Eliza's shoulders. Eliza couldn't answer. She could still hear the wolves outside, growling, pacing around the cabin like predators circling their prey. The sound of their claws scraping against the dirt was unsettling, too loud, too close. Eliza pressed her ear to the door, her breath catching in her throat as she listened. The howls echoed again, this time far too close. The wolves were moving, their low growls vibrating through the wood. She could imagine them, their glowing eyes just outside, waiting for an opening. Her father moved quickly to the corner of the room, where their emergency supplies were stored in a large wooden chest near the fire. He yanked it open, grabbing the pack filled with food, water, and other necessities. His movements were sharp and deliberate, but there was something frantic about the way he worked, as though every second counted. "We need to leave," he said, his voice strained as he pulled the pack open. "Now." Eliza's chest tightened. Her eyes flicked toward the window, her heart racing as she peered out into the night. The darkness was alive with those glowing eyes. There were more of them now, their silhouettes moving like ghosts between the trees. They circled, relentless, like shadows stalking their prey. She could hear the soft, rhythmic padding of their paws on the earth, steady and methodical. They weren't going anywhere. "Why aren't they leaving?" Eliza whispered, her voice barely audible. Her father's hand paused as he turned to her, his face grim. "They're not just hunting to hunt. They're after us." Eliza swallowed hard, her throat dry. There was no question in her mind anymore. These weren't just animals, mindless creatures out for a meal. They were organized. They had purpose. And they had already found them. The door shuddered suddenly, and a clawed paw scraped across the wood with a sickening sound that sent a chill down Eliza's spine. She flinched, her heart pounding faster. The wolves were testing the cabin, trying to find a weak spot. Her father moved to the window, pulling the thick curtains aside just enough to peer outside. He scanned the area quickly, his face hardening as he took in the pack. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice low but urgent. "It's too dangerous. Get your things, Eliza. Now." But Eliza didn't move. She stood frozen, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic mess. The pack was too large, too close. They had no weapons, no means of escape, and the cabin was no fortress. Even if they managed to get away, where could they go? Her mother, noticing Eliza's hesitation, stepped forward, her hands shaking as she grabbed Eliza's shoulders. "Please, Eliza," she urged, her voice tight with panic. "We have to go. Now." The urgency in her mother's voice snapped Eliza out of her daze. But even as she turned to grab her bag, another howl rang out from the forest. It wasn't just distant anymore. It was closer, much closer, and it sent a cold shiver down Eliza's spine. Her mother turned toward the door, her eyes wide with terror. "They're getting closer," she said almost to herself. Eliza rushed to the pack, her hands shaking as she shoved clothes, water, and whatever she could grab into the bag. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with fear and the weight of impending doom. She could hear the wolves now, closer still, their growls rising in intensity. They were right there, just outside, and the tension was unbearable. Just as Eliza finished packing her things, a loud crash echoed from the door. The wolves had started to attack. A claw scraped along the wood again, deep and furious, making the entire cabin shake. Her father grabbed the rifle from beside the fireplace, his knuckles white as he gripped it. "They're not stopping," her father muttered, eyes flicking toward the door. The rifle was their only means of defense, but Eliza could see it in his face. The wolves were too many. Even with the rifle, it wouldn't be enough. A series of sharp, angry howls split the night, sending a wave of dread through her body. The wolves were no longer circling. They were attacking. Eliza's mother grabbed her arm again. "We need to leave now. If we don't..." Her voice cracked and her grip tightened, her eyes pleading with Eliza to understand. "We can't outrun them," Eliza whispered, her throat tight. "Where will we go?" Her father looked at her, his face drawn with worry. "We don't have a choice. We run. We head for the creek, up the ridge. It's our only chance." The weight of his words hung heavy in the room. Eliza had no choice but to nod, fear lodging itself deep in her chest. Another crash at the door jolted them back into reality. The wolves weren't waiting anymore. "Get to the back door," her father ordered, his voice steady but thick with urgency. Now. Eliza's mother rushed toward the back, pulling her toward the door. Eliza hesitated for just a second, staring at the front door, her heart racing. The wolves were right there, and it was only a matter of time before they broke through. They had to move, and fast. With a final glance at the door, Eliza ran toward the back of the cabin, her legs trembling beneath her, every muscle screaming for her to stop. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Outside, the night was thick with the sounds of the wolves closing in. And with each heartbeat, the chase began. Eliza's mother gripped her tightly, her arms shaking around her daughter, her breath coming in shallow, quick gasps. "We have to run," she whispered, her voice strained and hoarse with panic. Her words were barely audible above the frantic sound of their pounding hearts. "The wolves, they're getting closer." But Eliza didn't hear her. She didn't hear anything. Her eyes were fixed on the wall, where her grandfather's old slingshot hung, its leather straps worn but still strong. It was a relic, a symbol of the life they had left behind in the city. The life that now felt so far away, so irrelevant in the face of this overwhelming danger. Her grandfather had made that slingshot himself back when he was still strong, still teaching Eliza to hunt, to aim, to survive. He'd spent hours with her, showing her how to load it, how to calculate distance and wind, how to defend herself. It had always been something of a comfort to her, a reminder that no matter how hard things got, she could always rely on herself. But now, staring at it in the dim light of the cabin, Eliza felt a pang of doubt. The wolves were outside. They were growing bolder, their growls vibrating through the walls. The air was thick with their presence, a constant reminder of the danger closing in. The slingshot, it seemed so small now, so insignificant. What could it possibly do against a pack of wolves? She shook her head as if trying to clear her thoughts and reached for it. Her fingers were cold against the wood. The elastic was taut, but it still felt solid, familiar. The stone felt heavy in her palm as she grabbed it, but there was something about it, something in the way the cool stone fit in her fingers, that gave her the strength to push past the fear. "Eliza, what are you doing?" Her father's voice cut through the tension, filled with disbelief. The desperation in his tone told her everything she needed to know. He was scared. They were all scared. But there was no time to waste on fear. Her father stepped forward, his hand outstretched, a pleading look in his eyes. "Eliza, listen to me. This isn't the time for this. We need to get out of here. We need to move, now." She didn't answer. She didn't have the words. Her mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. She couldn't just run away. Not now. The wolves were out there, circling, hungry, desperate. Her mother had already started toward the back door, urging her forward with every step. But Eliza couldn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on the slingshot. She knew, deep in her gut, that there was no way out unless they fought back. The panic that had gripped her chest began to give way to something else. It was fear, yes, but it was also something else, something stronger. Determination. She loaded the stone into the slingshot, the familiar motion calming her hands even as they trembled. For a second, she closed her eyes, remembering her grandfather's voice, the way he had taught her to stand firm, to trust in her instincts. Her breath caught in her throat as she peeked out the window. The wolves were closer now. She could see their shapes, silhouettes moving in the shadows, their eyes glowing in the darkness, reflecting the firelight from inside the cabin. They weren't retreating. They were waiting. Watching. "Eliza, stop," her father said again, but this time his voice had shifted. There was an edge of panic in it, something that made Eliza's heart ache. "Please listen to me. We need to leave. Now." But Eliza didn't move. She couldn't. She couldn't just stand there and let them be prey. She had to do something. With trembling hands, she took one last look at her parents, at her mother, who had stopped by the back door, her eyes wide with terror and confusion, her face pale, and at her father, whose shoulders were slumped in defeat, his hand gripping the rifle like a lifeline. "I can't just run, Dad," Eliza said, her voice barely above a whisper, thick with emotion. Her throat was tight with fear, but the words came out anyway because they had to. "We're not just running away. We need to fight." Her father stared at her, the disbelief still in his eyes. He opened his mouth to argue, but he saw the look on her face, The same fierce determination that had always been there, the stubbornness that came from her heart and her blood. He swallowed hard, and for the first time, Eliza saw the faintest flicker of something like approval, pass through his eyes. "Eliza," he began, but his voice faltered. He didn't know what to say. How could he? They were facing death. What good was a slingshot against a pack of hungry wolves? He didn't know. But in that moment he understood that Eliza wasn't asking for permission. She wasn't waiting for a sign or a solution. She was ready to do whatever it took to protect her family. "I'm going outside," Eliza said, her voice firmer now, the quiver of fear gone, replaced with a quiet strength. Her mother stepped forward, grabbing her arm desperately. "No, Eliza, please. Don't." But Eliza gently pulled away. "I'm not leaving you behind." Her heart was pounding in her chest as she stepped outside. The night air was cold against her skin, the sound of the wolves' growls louder than ever. They were everywhere now, closer than before, their eyes gleaming, their low growls filling the air. The scent of the pack was thick in the air, sharp and animalistic, and it sent a shiver down Eliza's spine. But she didn't flinch. She had the slingshot in her hand, the stone still loaded, her fingers steady as she took aim. She didn't know if this would work. She didn't know if this would stop them. But she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Eliza's eyes scanned the shadows, looking for the pack. And then she saw them, just beyond the tree line, glowing eyes staring back at her from the darkness. With a deep breath, she pulled the slingshot back, feeling the tension in the elastic stretch as the stone fit snugly between the cords. "Focus. Fire." The stone flew through the air, cutting the night in two, a sharp whistling sound before it collided with something in the distance. A howl erupted from the darkness as the stone struck one of the wolves, the creature yelping in surprise and pain. For a moment the pack seemed to hesitate, just a moment, but it was enough. Enough for Eliza to make her next move. The fight had begun. The night was cold, but Eliza burned with a strange, fierce determination. The moonlight cast long shadows over the clearing, making the trees look like silent witnesses to the chaos unfolding. The wolves were closing in, their eyes gleaming like embers, their growls vibrating in the air, so deep and menacing it felt like the ground itself was shaking. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat a drum of fear and resolve. She had never felt anything like this before, a mixture of terror and courage so pure it made her feel both small and powerful at once. She stood outside the cabin, feet planted firmly on the earth, facing the pack head-on. They were almost here. She could hear her mother screaming from the doorway, her voice trembling with fear. "Eliza, no. Get inside. Please." But Eliza didn't move. She couldn't. Her body was shaking, but her hands were steady. She raised the slingshot, her fingers gripping the elastic with purpose. She could feel the stone resting between her fingers, its cool surface a stark contrast to the fire burning inside her. She aimed, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts. The first wolf lunged at her with terrifying speed, its sharp teeth bared in a feral snarl, but Eliza didn't hesitate. She had to stop it. She pulled the slingshot back, her muscles screaming with the strain, and let the stone fly. It struck the wolf square in the chest, sending it stumbling back with a yelp. The creature howled in pain, its eyes wide with surprise, before retreating into the darkness. A sense of triumph flooded through Eliza, but it was fleeting. The wolves were not backing down, they were still coming. She could hear them, their growls growing louder, more desperate, as though they sensed her newfound resolve. "Eliza." Her father's voice rang out from the doorway, sharp with fear. He appeared beside her, his rifle raised, his eyes wild with panic. "Get back inside. Now." But Eliza didn't move. She couldn't. Not now. The wolves weren't just going to let them go. They were too close. Too hungry. And if they kept backing away, they'd only be cornered. She had to keep them away, had to buy them time. She pulled another stone from her pocket, loaded it into the slingshot, and fired again. The stone zipped through the air, a blur of motion, and struck one of the wolves directly in the eye. The wolf howled in agony, its head snapping back. For a moment the pack hesitated, growling low in confusion, unsure of this new threat. Eliza's heart raced, her adrenaline pumping through her veins like wildfire. She felt a surge of something she couldn't name, but it pushed her forward. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She was fighting for her family, fighting for her home, fighting for the chance to live. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. Another wolf, larger than the rest, faster too. It darted forward with incredible speed, its eyes locked on Eliza with terrifying intent. Before she could react, the wolf slammed into her with bone-crushing force. She was knocked off her feet, the world spinning as she hit the ground hard. The slingshot flew from her hands, landing somewhere in the dark. The wolf's hot breath seared against her skin as it pinned her down, its massive jaws snapping just inches from her face. Her hands flew to its muzzle, pushing with all her strength, but it was too strong. Too heavy. The wolf's growl rumbled deep in its chest, vibrating through her body. "Eliza!" Her mother screamed from the doorway, her voice hoarse with terror. Her heart skipped a beat, and in that instant, everything became clear. She couldn't die here. Not like this. Not when her family still needed her. The wolf's weight was pressing down on her chest, and her vision blurred, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't let this be the end. Desperation flooded her veins. With a cry, she pushed harder against the wolf, using all her strength to shove its massive head away. But it was like trying to move a mountain. She could feel its breath on her face, its teeth so close that she could almost taste the danger. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something. Her father's rifle. It was still in his hand, raised, but he wasn't able to aim properly with the wolf on her. Eliza's mind raced. Her only chance was to get the wolf off her, to give her father an opening. With everything she had left, she shifted her body, using her legs to push up under the wolf's stomach. She grabbed at its fur, yanking with all her strength, and managed to wedge her knee between its body and hers. She shoved again, harder this time, and the wolf gave a surprised snarl, releasing its grip for just a split second. That was all Eliza needed. With a scream, she rolled to the side, breaking free from the wolf's grasp. She scrambled to her feet, gasping for air, her heart racing in her chest. The wolf was momentarily stunned, disoriented by the struggle. In that split second, her father took aim. Bang! The shot rang out, sharp and loud in the night, and the wolf fell to the ground with a sickening thud, its body twitching as it breathed its last. Eliza's father lowered the rifle, his face grim, his eyes full of both relief and sorrow. Eliza's knees went weak and she collapsed to the ground, her hands trembling violently. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted and dizzy. But she was alive. She was still alive. Her mother rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around Eliza, her face pale and tear-streaked with fear. "Thank God. Oh, thank God," she whispered, her voice shaking. Eliza leaned into her mother's embrace, trying to steady her breath. Her whole body felt like it was vibrating with the aftershocks of fear and relief. But as the adrenaline drained away, she became acutely aware of the stillness in the air. The wolves were no longer growling, no longer circling. The pack had scattered. For the first time that night, there was silence. Eliza looked up at the sky, her body sore, her heart still racing. She had stood her ground. She had fought, and for the first time she realized that she was capable of far more than she had ever thought. But the night wasn't over yet. The wolves might be gone for now, but the danger wasn't finished. They needed to move. Fast. "We need to go," her father said quietly, his voice a little hoarse. "They'll come back. We have to find a safer place." Eliza nodded, her mind already shifting gears. They couldn't stay here. The wolves had learned that they were not an easy target. The pack would return. But they would be ready. Eliza lay there in the dirt, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Her body was trembling, every muscle aching from the struggle. Her face was pressed against the cold earth, her heart pounding so loudly in her chest that she could barely hear anything else. The wolf stood over her, its breath hot and foul, its teeth gleaming in the moonlight. Its eyes were wild, filled with hunger and fury. Eliza could see the muscles in its legs tensing, ready to pounce. Her mind raced, but her body felt like lead. She was out of options. She couldn't reach the slingshot, couldn't even move fast enough to escape. All she could do was stare into the eyes of the wolf, waiting for the final moment when its teeth would sink into her flesh. And then in the silence a shot rang out. The sound was deafening, slicing through the night like a thunderclap. The wolf was thrown backward, its body tumbling through the air before it landed with a sickening thud. It howled in pain, a guttural, desperate sound, before scrambling to its feet and retreating into the shadows. The pack, which had been circling the cabin, hesitated. For a moment there was a strange, tense silence. The wolves looked back into the dark forest, their glowing eyes scanning the shadows as though waiting for something, or someone. And then one by one they retreated, slipping silently back into the trees, their eerie howls fading with each passing second. The danger was not over, but for now they had been driven off. Eliza's father rushed to her side, his hands shaking as he pulled her into his arms. His voice was hoarse with relief and fear. "You're safe, Eliza. You're safe." Eliza could barely process his words. She was alive. She was alive. But her body felt like it was made of stone, weighed down by exhaustion, by everything that had happened. And yet, even in the midst of her fear and pain, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of triumph. The wolves had come. They had nearly killed her. But she had fought back. She had saved her family. She had won. But the victory came at a price. The moment the adrenaline started to fade, Eliza's body collapsed into the warmth of her father's arms, and for the first time in hours she allowed herself to cry. The tears came fast and furious, hot against her cold skin, as though they had been held back for far too long. Fear, relief, exhaustion, all mingled together in a wash of emotions she couldn't even begin to name. Her shoulders shook with the weight of it, and she clung to her father like a lifeline. He held her close, his hands gentle but firm, his heart pounding just as violently as hers. Eliza could hear her mother's soft sobs from the cabin, the sound of her mother's relief echoing through the night. But Eliza didn't let go of her father. Not yet. The world had felt so small before, so quiet and peaceful. But tonight, it had felt like the earth itself had opened up to swallow them whole. She had learned that peace could be fragile, that it could be broken in an instant by a pack of wolves, by nature itself, by forces beyond their control. But even more than that, Eliza realized something even deeper. She had learned that courage didn't come without its price. It didn't come without fear. And it didn't come without sacrifice. It wasn't just the wolves that had nearly taken everything from her. It was the price she had paid, her own terror, her own vulnerability, her own breaking point. She had stood in the face of it, fought and survived. But she knew it wasn't over. She knew that the world didn't always work in her favor. That sometimes, the balance of things was always tilted in favor of the beast that lurked in the darkness. Her father's voice trembled as he whispered, "You're so brave, Eliza. I'm proud of you." She couldn't answer him. Not with words. She just held on tighter, her tears soaking through his shirt. She wanted to say something, to reassure him, to tell him that it was all going to be okay. But she couldn't. She didn't have the strength. Not yet. And as she clung to her father, she realized something else. The world wasn't always a place where good things happened. Not always. Sometimes the price of peace was measured in fear, in loss, in the moments where you had to fight tooth and nail just to survive. Eliza had faced that tonight. She had faced the wolves. But she had also faced herself, the fear inside her, the limits of her own strength. And somehow, despite everything, she had survived. For now they were safe. For now the danger had passed. But as she closed her eyes, resting against her father's chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. The wolves had retreated, but they were always out there. In the woods. In the shadows. Waiting. And in the silence of the night, Eliza understood. The world would never be as simple as it once seemed. But she would be ready. Because sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in winning. It was in standing up again after you'd lost everything.